A leader is a person who knows what needs to be done next, knows why it's important, and can bring together the resources necessary to accomplish the task, usually people. If a person is in a position of leadership, it doesn't make him a leader. You put a manager in a leadership position, he'll still be a manager. You put a leader in a manager's position, he'll still be a leader. A leader is a person who knows what needs to be done next and knows why. In times of crisis, that's what we need. That's what George Washington recognized. Within a matter of days, this whole thing is going to stop unless someone begins to lead. In the 1930s, in the period just before World War II, Adolf Hitler sensed that he was a leader and that his opponents didn't have any. And so he began to test them. He moved into the demilitarized zone in violation of all the agreements just to see if anybody reacted, and nobody did. And so then he decided to go into Austria and see if anyone reacted, and no one did. And then he went in and took part of Czechoslovakia to see if anyone reacted, and no one did. All during this time, there's a fellow by the name of Winston Churchill. And Winston Churchill is a leader. And lots of times people are jealous of leaders. And so in a parliamentary system, when you get together to form a new government, everybody agrees who's going to be the prime minister, who's going to be the finance minister, who's going to be the defense minister. And they all come to an agreement. And the first vote is who's going to be prime minister. But in the 1930s, in 3 governments, the first vote was not who's going to be prime minister. The first vote was this: let's make sure none of us put Winston Churchill any place in the cabinet. Because they knew no matter where he sat at the end of the table, he would overpower them. And so they literally locked him out of parliament, out of government. So he didn't even attend. He went down to Chartwell, sat there with his easel and began to paint. They said within 36 inches of that easel was more power than all the houses of Westminster, because everybody knew that he knew what was going on. And people would come to visit him, and Hitler would attack him. Even though he held no position of responsibility, Hitler would attack him because he knew that Churchill understood what he was up to. But nobody listened. In 1938, finally, in September 1st, 1939, he marched into Poland, beginning of the Second World War. He then marched out throughout all of Europe, till finally it's April of 1940, and Europe is gone. And by this time, Britain is surrounded. And the king did something that hadn't been done in 400 years. He called in the prime minister, Neville Chamberlain, and said, "You know what we know, that you guys have been dead wrong for the last 10 years. So I will take the seals of power without an election." We're not going to have an election. We don't have time for that. We're going to take the seals of power and we're going to give them to Winston Churchill. And thank you very much, but don't let the door hit you. He then invited Winston Churchill to come in, and he gave him the authority to form a government. Churchill says as he left the Buckingham Palace, he felt the burdens of responsibility descend upon his shoulders. He said, but yet he felt that his entire life had been but a preparation for this hour. And then he said, for the first time, he went home and slept the sleep of a newborn babe, content in the knowledge that finally someone was in charge who knew what they were doing. But now, Hitler has taken over France, Holland, Belgium, formed an alliance with Italy, all of Europe, all of the great powers. What can Britain do against it? In fact, there's a book called 5 Days in London, in which it's now speculated that the reason the king decided to change government was that there was a provision to have a peace negotiation with Hitler by the British as to whether or not they would negotiate as to who would control the seas, and perhaps Britain would be allowed to keep its king or whatever. And so the whole world was sitting to see what is going to happen. This nation that is now crippled, it has refused to take a stand militarily. What is going to happen? And so Churchill went to Parliament to make his speech. Everybody in the world stopped. People in America, certainly people in Europe, certainly Hitler, certainly the British. Let me just give you a few words as to what this country faced. Remember, economically, it's the same as it was the day before. Militarily, it's the same as it was the day before. Politically, the political system has not changed. What has changed? Leadership. And so he said this to a waiting world. He said, the Battle of France is over. I expect the Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of all Christian civilization. Upon it depends our British life. The whole fury and might of the enemy must soon be turned upon us. Hitler knows that he will have to break us on this island or he will lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all Europe will be freed and the life of the world may move forward into broad sunlit uplands. As for us, we shall not flag and we shall not fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and on the oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight on the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. We will not fail. For if we do, the entire world, including the United States, including all that we have known, or all that we have cared for, will sink into an abyss of the dark ages. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth were to last for 1,000 years, that people will say historically that this was their finest hour. Well, in a time of crisis, we need leadership. In a time of crisis, the Chinese terms for crisis is danger and opportunity. That's where we are now. We are at a dynamite opportunity. The entire world is on its hinges that doesn't know where to go. The strongest economy in the world, the largest economy in the world is the United States of America. The strongest military in the world is the United States of America. The greatest political system in the history of man is the United States of America. You know what it needs? It needs a leader. It needs a leader that recognizes that this nation need not fear the future. We have, among other places, no one else can say this, America has the capacity at any given time to be energy independent. We are number one in natural gas. We are barely number two in coal. The Congress has prohibited the cataloging of how much oil we have on federal lands, because if anybody knew, then you'd say, why are we importing all this oil? Let me tell you what happened this week. In Ohio, in the eastern half of Ohio, they have now estimated between 8 and 9 billion barrels of oil. Now this isn't the Balkan up in North Dakota and South and all these other places. This is dumpy little southeast Ohio. We have we import a billion a year. We got 9 billion just in little southern Ohio. This nation could be energy independent whenever we have a leader that wants to be. Number two. Where do people want to invest? Where do people want to build? Where do people want to have a country, have a company? They want to have it in America. All over the world. Our tax policy has driven them away. We get a leader that wants to go to zero capital gains, and by the way, we have a candidate for president that wants to do that. We go to zero capital gains, we go to energy independence, this nation could take off like a rocket. Now, what's the prohibition? Only one. You and I have to make sure that we and every person we know shows up on election day and votes for those principles. Votes for free enterprise economically. Votes for a strong defense to make our friends in Israel and elsewhere secure. Votes for a political system that people believe in. Final thought. The chief lawyer for the ACLU was a person by the name of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Bill Clinton put her on the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, she's Jewish. She's a refugee, a daughter of refugees who came to America because of our constitutional system that protect life. And yet Ruth Bader Ginsburg went to Cairo a few weeks ago and told the Muslim Brotherhood, if I were you, I would not look to America's Constitution as an example of how to draw up a new government. Let me tell you, we need people in the presidency that will appoint people to the judgeships that believe in the American Constitution. And that's the decision that you and I are going to make.